Brahms. Some call him a charlatan, some call him a great innovator. He is certainly, in my opinion, the most misunderstood composer with a great name of them all. And that man is Franz Liszt, 1811-1886.
He was born a year after Chopin.
That's right, yes.
And this was what, the time of the great piano virtuosi? He just sort of fit into that? Is that a fair assumption to make?
Absolutely. He comes at the right time, just as Chopin does. 1809 is Mendelssohn's birth. 1810 is Schumann. 1810 is Chopin. 1811 is Liszt. 1812 is Sigismund Thalberg. 1813 is Wagner and Verdi.
A banner decade, it turns out.
Oh, yes, quite a few years there. And it's no mistake when a clump of composers and performers are born, especially composers, of course. That means that things are coming along. In other words, the transition period that was to produce this glorious romantic art of the 19th century was ready to go, and it wouldn't have happened if these several men were not born at that time.
How about politically and sociologically? The 1800s were, of course, tumultuous times in Europe.
Absolutely. We think of...
where was Liszt born? And
Liszt was born at a small town in Hungary, Reading, Hungary, and he was actually a semi-serf in a sense. His father was in the company of Prince Esterhazy, as Haydn had been 2 generations before. And Liszt's mother was Austrian, and there was very little chance of any cultivation in this limited environment.
Was he a prodigy?
He was one of the great prodigies.
And his family, were they musically inclined at all?
Yes. Adam Liszt played the piano, and probably quite well, and this is where it all began, of course. Now, as for Liszt, the composer, it's astronomical how prolific he was. Works that we just never get to hear. He wrote nearly 1,400 works. Many of them transcriptions, many of them reissues of works that he himself did earlier and didn't like, and refined them down. He was a constant worker, and yet he had time for one of the most interesting lives of any man that ever lived, and that's quite a statement.
And I hope you'll fill us in on that.
And we will, as we go on. He spanned the 19th century, and in a way he was Napoleon, Byron, Christ, because he was an abbé, the devil, because of his constant interest in all types of Satanism. He was a yes, he was a complex man, and we will try to move into the barrier that is Franz Liszt, or as Ernest Newman once wrote, the most complicated psychological entity in music. Very difficult man, and some people just despise his life because it was so variegated, and others think, of course, of Liszt as the idol that many do. Without a doubt, he was the most talked about performer that ever lived, and in many ways he probably was the greatest pianist of all time.
But there are no recordings, of course, although the recording process had been invented in the late, 1890s, I suppose.
Well, he died in 86, and
so there's no hope there.
There had always been tantalizing rumors that a little cylinder by Liszt was made, but this has never been found, and I doubt that this is just wishful thinking. However, it wouldn't have mattered. He was well past his prime. He gave up concerts at the age of 37 years old, never to make another dollar from playing in public. As we unravel the man, I think you'll you'll be quite interested, Matt.
I'm sort of curious about his early musical education. To become a great pianist, obviously, unless you're truly exceptional, which he perhaps was, you need some really great teachers, and I'm wondering who they found for him and how that was arranged.
Well, after he studied with his father, and then he played at a concert, I think probably at the age of 8, there was a group of people that gave some money to the father and said, well, you have to get him to Vienna. Well, to Vienna he went, and he studied there with one of the founders of modern pianism, Carl Czerny, who wrote so many exercises and etudes which have made him one of the menaces for piano students in the last 6 generations. Anyway, Czerny saw instantly that this was a boy of genius and totally undisciplined. Already Liszt was a sight reader that just amazed people. Anything in front of him he would read. You see, Liszt had all of the past in his nervous system, and without a doubt the future, not only of pianism but of where music would go. And he had a long development process. For instance, Chopin, who was his great friend, died in 1849, right, as we now know. But he had never produced anything of great worth until after Chopin's death. It was a longer process. If he had died at the age of 38 as Chopin, there would have been no great composer in Franz Liszt. It would have, we would have had the roots, the seeds, but nothing really of the importance we now have.
In other words, you're saying that for the first 4 decades of his life, really, all the stuff is juvenilia or essentially worthless?
No, it's not essentially worthless. He just doesn't come into his own. And again, he spans the century. In other words, after the first generation of Romanticism, he has to go into new areas. After 1850, Europe becomes something as we know it today. The railroad is invented. Liszt turns from the stagecoach that he toured Europe with to the train. There's a new feeling in the world after the mighty revolution of 1848. And go on.
I was going to ask whether he was a supporter or a detractor of Wagner, because in a way I think of the two of them together.
Well, he became Wagner's father-in-law.
But did he approve of his music?
He not only approved of his music, the last word he uttered on his deathbed was Tristan. And in many ways that was the greatest work Liszt dealt with in his lifetime, and it was one of his aspirations to have put it on in Weimar, where Liszt settled in approximately 1848. That didn't happen, so he had been traveling, although ill, in his last few weeks to go to Bayreuth, which had now been open, Wagner's triumph, and he was to hear Tristan, a work that Liszt admired, and a work that Wagner might well not have composed had it not been for Liszt's own innovations as a composer. But we'll get into such a complicated career as a composer and as a man, and let's begin with, and this next 5 or 6 hours will be concerned with comparative performances of the Transcendental Études. Let's open with Lazar Berman doing the first one called Prelude, the Etude number 1, from this monumental series of etudes which opened new muscular resources in piano technique. You have heard 51 seconds of amazing virtuoso piano playing in the hands of Lazar Berman, Soviet pianist. The Transcendental Études took a long time in finding their final shape. When he was a boy and studying with Czerny, he had already begun this series, and they are works in the Czerny kind of figuration. As he becomes more and more innovative on the piano, after he had, believe it or not, heard Paganini, and thought, my God, if he can do this, what might not the piano be able to do? And he had transcribed some of the Paganini caprices, and in another program we will hear the caprices and the Paganini Études. These are the Transcendentals, and there are 12 of them. These were published in 1839. And this first one is something like the bleak Chopin Etude Opus 10 number 1. He's preludizing. He's saying this is the beginning of great things. And he made a version which was so very difficult that he himself had to suppress it and simplify it. So there are 3 actual developments in this set of etudes, and the one that finally he that we have come to know, this one here that we just heard, is refined from the second version, which was just too difficult. Perhaps only Liszt could play them the way they should have been. So he suppressed that edition, and this is what we now have, which is of great difficulty. The differences are not that great, and I think really it's more a refinement of what's best sounding on the instrument. Anyway, Berlioz wrote of Liszt's music about this time, when Liszt was playing these pieces for him. Unfortunately, one cannot hope to hear music of this kind often. Liszt created it for himself, and no one else in the world could flatter himself that he could approach being able to perform it. And compare this with Professor Dent's description of Busoni, one of the great pianists that ever lived and a great champion of Liszt. The greater works of Liszt, which minor pianists turn into mere displays of virtuosity because their technique is inadequate for anything beyond that, often sounded strangely easy and simple when they were played by Busoni. The glittering scales and arpeggios became what Liszt intended them to be, a dimly suggested background, while the themes in massive chords or singing melodies stood out clear. And Liszt evidently realized the danger of the extreme technical difficulty of some of his works. I mean, it's obvious that a composer is not going to become well known if nobody can play the music. However, his music certainly is flamboyant, it's reckless, supercharged, often sentimental, almost like an autobiography of his own being. And yet he is played badly. So you have to be a super virtuoso to play him. And we have just heard Lazar Berman. Can we do that again?
Mm-hmm. No problem at all. Anytime you say.
Mankind has always been fascinated with mechanical and technical feats. It's an important part of his creativity to be interested in them, and Liszt was, and a pianist to be able to play such etudes as these transcendentals has to literally jump out of his body. Let's hear a performance that probably will not be technically as phenomenal as we just heard in Berman's performance. Louis Kentner, a great champion of this composer. Louis Kentner, in a very good performance. He is musically a very fine pianist. Again, let's hear Berman to show what reckless virtuosity is. Bravo, Berman. My admiration has no bounds for such an ability to escape from your own limitations. The next performance of the first etude of the set of Transcendentals by another super virtuoso, Bolet. The last 30 measures finally spun out by Bolet, yet the Berman is my favorite. The next etude is truly a Paganini caprice. It must have been inspired by the diabolical wizardry of the Italian violinist, who was so much a spur to the virtuosity of the early 19th century. It's in A minor, molto vivace, and we have a hair-raising performance by Lazar Berman. an absolute witch's Sabbath, the A minor etude from the Transcendentals, hair-raising performance by Lazar Berman. I'm always amazed when I hear this set. Matt, do we have another one? Coming right up?
Bolet.
Good. High-powered virtuosity by Jorge Bolet. We will pause now and return. We have not heard Kentner in that brilliant caprice, the second of the Transcendental Études in A minor, molto vivace. This one has no title. Many of the Liszt works have titles. He loved titles. He was a very well-read man, highly interested in literature and, of course, in the programmatic aspects of music. He's the inventor of the symphonic poem. Let's hear this second etude by Louis Kentner. eminent pianist Louis Kentner has always loved Liszt, plays many composers very well. Obviously, he does not have the recklessness necessary, the sheer mechanistic powers to play this as a Berman or Bolet. Let's again hear Lazar Berman.
Who else besides Berman? I'm trying to think,
in any generation there can never has been more than 6 or 7 people in the world that can do justice to these works.
Well, you said that once about Chopin, too, about the Mazurkas, for example.
I was speaking on another level, obviously, though, the musical quality. Well, in certain works, there will always be only a few, the Hammerklavier of Beethoven. How many people can really play it?
Oh, around
5 or
1 or 2
6
others,
or 7 in the world, really. The same with this set of etudes, the Chopin etudes, even the Chopin etudes, which are in many ways more difficult because they're more classical, they're purer.
With whom did you study these etudes?
I studied these
Lazar?
etudes with myself, and not all of them by any means. They're physically so taxing.
Mm-hmm. I was wondering whether author,
He
author
played,
Lesser,
yes,
right,
he
yeah.
played everything, but I don't think he had that kind of flair for this kind of music. It takes great flair as well. So you have to be able to come out of yourself. You have to have this sometimes hysterical quality that Liszt asks for, this flamboyance, and this superhuman technique.
In history, who can you think of that sort of met that? How about
Well, Busoni, no doubt,
Busoni?
could play him. Hoffman, surely. Yeah. Now, it's not to everyone's liking, Liszt's music. So, at this moment, I'm looking all over for the Ashkenazi version. He hasn't recorded all of them, but quite a few. The next etude is not one that asks for great virtuosity. Paysage is in French, meaning the scenery, landscape. And this is an interesting work because inside the middle section we have some wonderful syncopations that almost sound Brahmsian, and Brahms was only 5 years old when Liszt composed this work. Let's have Louis Kentner in this one. Louis Kentner in Liszt's third etude, Passage. Poco adagio is the marking. Well, frankly, that work bores me, always has. And I really can't wait to get to Mazeppa, the next etude.
Now, he has a symphonic poem by the same name, doesn't he?
Yes, and some of the same material. This is the way Liszt's mind worked. If he had some interesting thought, he would make a piano etude out of it. Later on, 5 years later, it would come to him, I have a larger vision of this. He'd make a symphonic poem of it. This was his kind of thinking. He wasn't interested in perfection, the type that Chopin was after.
That's my question.
Right.
Yeah.
The perfect, concise quality. He was a very different kind of mind. He is an experimenter, first and foremost. I don't mean to say that he doesn't give us highly finished works. There are times when they are not. And a great deal of Liszt is blemished. He doesn't have that concentration Chopin has, or Brahms, of course, or Bach, naturally.
Did he have the discipline to destroy some of his earlier works that he wasn't fond of?
No, he wasn't interested in destroying his works.
I mean,
they were a scrapbook for the whole landscape of his life. And that's the way he viewed his music, as an integral part of his existence. If he was interested in Dante, he'd write a Dante symphony. He was obsessed with Goethe's Faust. He wrote a Faust symphony. He thought in very grand lines. Yes?
I was going to ask, did he have any idols when he was studying composition? In other words, does he follow, was he really an innovator completely, or did he follow some trends of other composers?
Everybody follows somebody, I think. The statement, the greater the genius, the greater the debt. Liszt adored Bach. Again, one of these played all of the preludes and fugues. He was the first in Europe. Now, this is an important fact, the first in Europe to play all 32 Beethoven sonatas. Even early, in the Paris days, in the late 1820s, Czerny, his teacher, was a more fashionable composer than Beethoven, and on the program he would play a Beethoven sonata and say it was by Czerny. That's how he got away with it. Beethoven was just too much for the people of Paris in those days.
I wonder what his interpretations of Beethoven sonatas would have been like, I mean, to hear.
Well, having such a vast technique, Liszt often tampered with music, and this drove Berlioz and Mendelssohn and everyone wild, Chopin especially. Leave my works alone. Everything he touched, he started turning to himself. And as he grew, he took these bad habits and threw them away. But the temptation was always there. Liszt is half charlatan. Liszt is a mountebank. He's an actor. He's a Don Juan. He's a priest. He's the devil. All of these things are not insincere, in my opinion. They are the various masks he used to become transcendental. This title is no mistake. Let's hear Mazeppa, the fourth etude. was a hell of a roar. Mazeppa, the fourth Transcendental Etude of Liszt.
That was a very interesting work in that it was in some ways a bit vulgar. I thought I heard a dance hall tune. Not that I've ever
Indeed,
been to
it's vulgar. Liszt never apologized for being vulgar. Vulgarity is a part of our natures. Yes, the tunes in there are a type of Byronic romanticism, which was really almost musically Liszt's invention. And that's why we would call a work like this, or approximating it, Lisztian. We heard the pianist Lazar Berman. We will continue with these etudes on our next program. Thank you.
We have 1,397 more works, right?
3 a day. We will be here. Well, we'll become immortal then, because that will be beyond possibility. Of course, Liszt has not been treated on record in the same way as other composers, and complete this or that doesn't exist in many versions. Thank you, Matt, and thank you for listening.
You've been listening to a music